Welcome back to Lucore Automotive Services. Today we're working on a 1996 G-Van, which no mechanic likes to work on, but hey, you know what, we'll show you some of the ins and outs of working on old cars, because that's what we do here. So this van was brought to us with a misfire, coolant leak, it's got some other leaks, and they want us to make this reliable so the owner's granddaughter can drive it to Colorado. And right off the bat, we see that somebody has launched the parts cannon at this thing repeatedly. It has a bunch of aftermarket parts in it. These distributor caps, you only want to use AC Delco or original equipment GM AC original equipment caps on these. These things have a path in them and they burn through. This one actually ohm checked okay. I'm going to put it back on and verify which cylinder we have our misfire on, because we have a PO300 code, which means it's got something not doing what it's supposed to do, and it's a cat killer. Not the furry type, the type that's really expensive to fix on the bottom of the car that helps your emissions stay clean. Another thing we noticed, or at least that I noticed as soon as I got in here, was somebody mounted the distributor tab on when they replaced the distributor that they probably didn't need to replace. They put the distributor tab on upside down, and since it doesn't fit that way, they ended up grinding the tab, the hole in the tab, to make it work that way. And just a bit of advice: if you have to grind a hole of something that you just took apart and it goes back together and you have to grind something to make it fit, you're probably doing something wrong. So we'll undo that later. We'll verify our plug wires are in the correct spots, and then we'll fire it up, verify which cylinder is our misfire, and then we will do our intake manifold gasket because it's leaking. And while we're doing that, we may actually pull the injector spider out and verify that all of our injectors are firing, because that I've seen those stick and not fire a cylinder. So yeah, let's get moving. And right off the bat, I'm gonna guess the wires were on wrong. I should have marked them when I took them off, but I never trust anybody's work, because it's usually why it's here is because somebody did something wrong. 8. And that leaves 4. And then our coil wire. Misfires on 1 and 3. Did I mix up my wires? Maybe. I did. No, I didn't. Yes, I did. I don't know. Come on now. So let's pull those plugs, see what we see, and we'll do a compression test on those just to make sure. NGK, Iridium, really? That one's a Bosch. How many different spark plugs do we have in this thing? So we've got new spark plug wires, new cap, new distributor, new coil, new wires, some new spark plugs, some old spark plugs. It looks like it might have had the injector body replaced. So somebody's definitely been launching the parts cannon on this thing. It's got new coolant temp sensors. It's got all sorts of stuff. All that stuff doesn't go bad all at once. Let's do a compression test. I wasn't expecting that to fire with the distributor disconnected. So, do a compression test. I found number one plug was clean as a whistle, which could be a couple things. And then the compression's considerably lower than the other two cylinders, but that could be because it's fuel washed. And then we'll probably need to put a set of plugs in this thing, but I think I saw a set of them in the door, so I guess I'll just put those in it. Except they're the wrong plugs. It's funny because people are like, oh, I just put plugs in it. And then we pull them out and we put the correct ones that are rated for the car, and the car runs better. There is something to be said about putting the correct parts in the vehicle. But someday people will learn that. So I pulled out all 8 spark plugs, and they look pretty horrible. We have 3 different types of spark plugs in this thing. Some of them are black, one of them is clean as a whistle, and one of them actually looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and put on a new AC Delco cap, a new AC Delco rotor. I'm going to do a compression test with all the spark plugs out, throttle wide open, ignition module disconnected. That way I can get a consistent engine RPM, get consistent compression readings from the cylinders, and that'll let me know the integrity of the engine before I try and do a bunch of other work to this thing. We'll do that, and then we'll move forward. I'll show you these spark plugs because it's pretty funny. So 1, 3, 5, 7, 2, 4, 6, 8. The entire right bank is running fat. This one's not firing at all, but appears to have fuel. This one looks like it's doing all right. These two are pretty fouled. All right, so some days are a challenge in the shop. I'm not gonna lie. So I was getting some inconsistent compression readings, and I'm like, something's amiss. I'm doing something wrong, or my tools are messed up, or there's just blatantly something completely wrong going on. And it turned out that my tool, so a compression tester has a valve stem in it, just like in your tire valve stem. There's a valve core in the end of this, and it allows it to trap the compressed air inside the tool. And if this doesn't work right, you'll get inconsistent or no readings because your pressure bleeds off as soon as you stop cranking. And so what happened was this guy stopped working, and it started giving me inconsistent readings, and then it started giving me 0 for readings. And I'm like, I can hear the compression hitting. You can hear the engine RPM changing when it hits the one cylinder. Like, I know I have compression, but I'm not seeing it. Something's amiss. So I fixed my tool. So we're gonna put those in, and then I'm gonna fire it up and see if we're still misfiring. If we are, it's probably gonna be an injector issue, which I've got a way to show that off, which I will do that as soon as I pull the intake off. But I'm gonna go ahead and put in the spark plugs, put on my wires, put on my cap and rotor, fire it up, make sure that I've got it running correctly before I pull the intake manifold off to replace the intake manifold gaskets, which are leaking, which these all leaked back then. This was a major money maker for automotive technicians from 96 to 99. So anyway, we'll keep moving forward. Throw that guy in the trash. Luckily we have extra valve cores. Now the valve cores in these they have a white band around them, and they are a very, very soft, low pressure spring, whereas the ones in your tire valve stems have a higher pressure spring. They're usually red or black or yellow, and the different bands are probably indicate a different pressure. I don't know. I've never gotten that deep into valve core function. So on these vans, I do spark plugs through the wheel well. I can get all 4 on this side through the wheel well. I can get the front 3 through the wheel well on the passenger side, and then the rear one I actually do from underneath. It's real easy to get to from underneath the vehicle. Doing them from on top is a horrible way to do these. I put my 8 spark plugs in here that are all of the correct and same bits. I put on some new plug wires because the aftermarket plug wires, when I've used them on these engines, I've had them last 10,000 miles, I've had them last 20,000 miles, and I've had AC Delco wires last 120, 140,000 miles. So that's why I prefer the better product, and the AC Delco parts aren't that much more for the longevity that they provide. It's just a better part. So I installed the plug wires, I installed the plugs, I ohm checked the distributor cap that's on there, and it ohm checks okay. So I was like, all right, well, we'll keep using that until I take this apart. I'll put the new AC Delco one on when I put it together for final assembly. And I put those parts in, and I decided to fire it up and see if it runs smoother with those parts, just to see if plugs or the non-carboned out plugs and the good wires would solve my problem. I fired up. I still have a misfire in 1 and 3. Okay. And I looked at the connector on the fuel injector spider harness, and I noticed the connector was not pushed down all the way. And I'm like, oh, you know what? I haven't seen that in a long time. Sometimes when you push that connector down in, it can bend the pins for the fuel injectors, and then you lose your connection to 1 or 2 or however many injectors, and you'll lose a cylinder. Now, since my number one cylinder, the spark plug, was completely clean, I'm thinking maybe the connector wasn't put on correctly, and maybe we have a bent pin situation. So I'm going to pull that apart, and if that's what I find, I'll pull it out of the truck and show you what it is and why it's a problem. If not, then I have a bigger problem. But I know my compression's good, relatively, for a 100,000 mile 305. It's good enough that it should run smooth. I have good spark plugs. I have good wires. My distributor is doing what it's supposed to do. So, at that point, we'll check our connector and we'll keep moving forward. Probably can't show that. We'll have to. We'll have to probably just screenshot that. Yep. Stop flipping on me, man. Oh well. So we got a bent pin. I'm going to try and straighten that out. So I'm using what is called a Noid light, and hopefully you can see it back there. So when I straightened out my pin on my number 3 injector, I put it back together, I fired it up, my number 3 injector, ooh, bright light. My number 3 injector started firing, my misfire number 3 went away. But I still have a misfire in cylinder number 1. And I thought, I'm like, man, maybe the injector's bad, but it looks like they put a brand new injector, like a 8-pot injector, whole new assembly in here, because it's all covered in, it's got assembly lube all over it. And I'm assuming this, I haven't verified that with the customer yet, but we'll figure that out. But I decided to verify whether or not my PCM was actually sending a fire signal to number 1 injector, because I'm like, man, I've checked everything else, and maybe the pin on number 3 being bent over sideways like it was, contacting one of the pins on the number 1 injector, maybe it shorted out the driver in the electronic control module. So if you can see this when I crank it, you can see I can get my flash signal. That flash is my injector pulse from the PCM. I'm going to put this in number 1. That should be number 3. This should be number 1. I don't have a pulse at number 1. I have a pulse everywhere else. I know this because my cylinders are firing. But number 1, we've got no pulse. So I'm going to go to the PCM. I'm going to verify my wires from the PCM that fire my injector through here. Basically, I'll put it on and ohm check my connector. So the PCM's cooked.
Or it's got a broken wire somewhere.
Or it has a broken wire, so we have to verify it's not a broken wire.
Lots of fun to figure out.
Electrical is the worst thing to try and have to diag. It's brutal. But they definitely threw the parts cannon at this thing trying to fix it. I'm still giggling over this distributor. Why? Why would you do that?
Were you able to flip it around and save it?
I haven't touched the distributor
yet.
I haven't touched that yet. All right. This one has become quite the diagnostic feat. Sometimes you get a real ball buster, and this is one of those. So this fan was brought to us with a coolant leak, which turned out to not only be an intake manifold gasket, but also a radiator. And I still have to do those. But I was thinking about the misfires, and I'm like, man, I'm not finding what my problem is. And then compression tests, mismatched plugs, aftermarket ignition components. So we started over with that. I found the bent pin on the connector in the new fuel injector. Fired it up. Cool, I found my problem. Well, I'd only fixed one of my injector problems. So I'm like, all right, well, I checked my powers to my injectors. It's a shared power, so if one injector has power, they all have power. I verified my connector at the injector had power. Okay, good. I don't have pulse there, so that means I've got one wire between my injector and the PCM that is not making contact. I'm like, well, let's check the wire, make sure we have continuity. So I pull the connectors out, and I start looking for my stuff. And this one here has a black wire that's loose and it's in the wrong hole. So let's fix that. It's supposed to be in pin number 6. It's in pin number 3. Hey. Sometimes working on cars is a lot more than just changing parts. Alright, so I double checked my wiring diagram. The 6 that was in my head was going from one flow chart to the other flow chart for the wiring diagram. Pin number 3 is black. This is the black wire. Once it's pushed in, On this, it has to go all the way in and then it engages. And these little tabs here, you can lift up and pull them out. I'm going to make sure that guy's engaged and locked. Put my cap back on because the cap locks all the pins in place. He looks good. Let's plug my PCM back together and see if it works correctly now, because that'll be a relief. Good Lord. I'm going to verify my pulse in there with my Noid light. It's a miracle! Yay! I win! Verified pulse on number 1. The idle's nice and smooth. Now it's time to take it apart. I got to put a radiator, upper and lower hose on it, and an intake manifold. But at least I know I don't have to look for anything out of the ordinary while I'm going through doing that, so I can just rip the intake out, clean everything up, put it back together, and then I can ship this thing down the line. Because this thing took forever to diagnose. But sometimes they beat you up. Whew, that's a relief. If you look at this bracket, you can see the lumps are facing up. And somebody put this distributor in. It's actually at the wrong angle because this flat should be parallel with the back of the intake. So the distributor is actually installed incorrectly. The bracket was installed upside down, and then they ground out the hole to get it somewhat in time. I don't understand. You took it apart, it had a hole in it. You shouldn't have to grind something to make it work when you're done. Just saying. Who does that? Alright, well, I actually got a really good night's sleep last night because I had closure on what was causing my drivability concerns on this van. Now I am just tearing the intake off of it to put a new intake manifold gasket in it, and I already have the radiator out of it because it actually had a split on the side tank with a very slow leak. So we want to make this thing safe and reliable to take on long trips for this fella. So we're doing what we need to do to make that happen. These are known for intake manifold gasket leaks. They often leak and people don't fix them, and then the engine gets taken out because the coolant leaks into the engine, dilutes the engine oil, and causes damage to the engine bearings. Not what you want to do. This van's only got 100,000 miles on it. It actually runs pretty good now that we found all the problems that were causing misfires in number 1 and 3. Right now I am almost down to ready to pull the intake off. I have all the front bracketry off, and basically I'm ready to pull the distributor out. I'm going to put a thermostat in it because this thermostat housing had never been off. I know this because the PCM ground that bolts to this was not broken, because they break every time you take them off. And so I'm going to clean this up in the vapor hone real quick, take a minute, and it should be pretty cool when I'm done. And then I'll keep moving. I'm going to clean my parts as I go and get things moving. We're going to do intake manifold gaskets, valve covers, and put it all back together. So our new parts cleaner does really nice work. This is a sealing surface for the radiator hose. It has a bunch of corrosion buildup on it. You put a new hose on it, it'll end up leaking. This is nice and clean now. My new hose will clamp on clean, no leaks. Clean the gasket surface off. It looks really nice. So I'm not making it perfect all the way around. I'm just cleaning the areas I need to make sure that I get a proper repair. That way my customer has gotten their money's worth and then some. So really happy with that piece of equipment. Makes my life a lot easier for cleaning stuff quickly. It only took a couple minutes and this is done. So I gotta pull a few more bolts and this intake will be out of here. Oh, you're just gonna have to trust me. This part isn't very exciting. It's just me scraping the cylinder heads and the ends of the block and making it all clean so that when I put my RTV down, it will seal well and stick and keep the oil inside the engine and keep the coolant in the coolant passages. Well, that's looking pretty good. No engine leaks, no oil leaks, no vacuum leaks, no coolant leaks. So, exhaust sounds a little loud, but it still needs a catalytic converter because the converter's roasted from the misfires that this thing has had for so long. But the customer is choosing not to have the exhaust fixed here. It's fine. Do what you can. With that, I'm going to check over a few things, double check some bits and pieces. Put the front wheels on, take it for a test drive. It's time to go see how this thing runs. Fun stuff. Where will I go? This is the rattiest chair I've ever seen. Is it gonna support me? Oof. Sometimes you just got to take a break in your van down by a river. Well, that wraps up this session of our van down by the river. This travel van is ready to go on its trip. They need to do some exhaust work to it yet, but the engine misfires are gone, the coolant leaks are gone, radiator's gonna be good. I just drove it about 20 miles, everything seems great, got good heat. Yeah, it's ready to roll. So I'm gonna chill here in this van down by the river, and next time you see me, I'll be hard at work. Thanks for watching. Click like, subscribe, leave us a comment below. Have a great day. Kind of cold. This would be better on a warmer day.